Is your deck too strong? Or maybe it's too weak?
I'm Mia, and I like the weather after it rains.
I'm BZ. I don't like going out in the rain, but I do like the weather after it rains. We're sponsored by Card Kingdom, and we're the Nitpicking Nerds, which I totally skipped over. But if you want to support this channel that you know and love, that you've been with us for years, and you're like, how can I support these guys? All you got to do is go to Card Kingdom with the link in our description that lets them know that we sent you, and it helps support the channel by buying the singles that you love.
Not only just singles, there's also supplies and sealed stuff. Go check it out. They have everything you need. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Great sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5% of your entire order. That is real money back in your pocket when you're buying the same sleeves you already were buying.
Yeah, they have temporarily updated their slogan. It's now Great Sleeves. I'm sure it'll be back to normal. Don't worry, but there was an update. We're also sponsored by you, our patrons. You make these things happen. You help give us money directly, and if you want to get your deck audited or watch us play a gameplay that you can't see on the main channel, you can head over to Patreon, maybe give us a few bucks, and we'll repay you with some cool exclusive content. And there's a Moxfield ad, but it's not right now. Don't worry. I know. It's a lot of ads. That's going to be later.
Moxfield, guess, but you can't because you're a liar. And if you are interested in our mats, we still have a few on our Whatnot store, but we are also partnered with Gamer Mats. You can go on their website, get all 3 for a discounted price. They don't have the signatures like they do on our Whatnot store, but you can also bundle them with a bunch of extra mats and supplies that they have on their website that are some of their original designs. Go check it out. Check our link below, and we're actually on the homepage right now. It's pretty cool.
And these are only available for the month of May. So if you want those cool designs, make sure, put it in your calendar, get to it pretty soon. But we're going to get to this video. A lot of Commander players can wind up in a problem situation if they bring a deck to a table that's actually weaker than they expected, or if it's actually too strong for what everybody agreed upon. So we're going to talk about cards and effects and things that are in your deck that might be secretly lowering your power level or raising your power. And I think we're going to start with cards that could be lowering your power, cards that can bring your deck down sort of and make it a little bit slower or a little bit less effective. And the first one we have here is a little category. It's tap lands. These are tap lands that have to come in tapped, generally for color fixing, so like the Mystic Monastery cycle of tri-lands. There's also the triomes that always come into play tapped. So they're good for mana fixing, but they're not fast. They're not fast. They take a turn off. They sort of like cost a mana to set up.
They're great on a budget, and sometimes that's how you can really build your 4 and 5 color decks on a pretty strict budget, because a lot of triomes and shocks and such are very expensive by Miso. But unfortunately, that does put you a turn or two behind your opponents if you play too many of them in your deck. Now, there are some tap lands with advantages. BZ's favorite, Field of the Dead, for instance. There's Surveil lands, deserts in certain like Yuma decks, for instance, or Hizazon. But in general, these decks do put you behind turn-wise, and they can make your deck a turn or two slower, which could bump your power level down by like a good notch or two, I'd say.
Yeah, those decks that can weaponize tap lands, or they're playing like Spelunking or something to offset that, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about, Thriving Meadow, or name another tap land.
Black Dragon Gate.
Black Dragon Gate. We're talking about like those lands where it feels like starting the game off with tap land, 2-drop, you're definitely behind. It's not a disaster, but I think it certainly is a slight little knock to your deck's power level, and it's just something to consider when building decks, if you're using Moxfield or whatever. Just see how many tap lands you have. It's going to contribute to what your power level is. The next thing we have here is conditional lands. Conditional lands, they're like sometimes okay to have just in case, but usually they're just kind of like hurting how fast a deck can power out the spells and get its mana on time. As soon as we start saying these, you're going to know what we mean. Temple of the False God is probably the best example. It doesn't make mana all the time.
Maze of Ith is another one, and I'm going to hear something. But what if Urborg is out? But what if Yavi Maya is out? Good for you. But that doesn't happen most of the time. I'm never tutoring for like Urborg and also Maze of Ith at the same time. It's more of just like oh, that's out. Did you know that one doesn't make mana?
Yeah, sometimes these lands can be really finicky. Unclaimed Territory is another one that I really just like. I think I dislike Unclaimed Territory as much as these other two, if not more, because it just doesn't always make the colors you need, and it's just a little bit off. I think a pretty good rule of thumb is just that when you play a land, you should probably be able to tap it for mana.
And you shouldn't have too many of those just-in-case lands in your deck. It just slows you down way faster, even faster than tap lands, I'd say.
Sometimes what people will do is they'll cut a spell for these lands like Maze of Ith that don't actually make mana, because it's not really a land. But I just think if you're not doing that, they can definitely cause you to stumble. And I think in general, they're cards we just tend to avoid. The next category is part of what makes Commanders so battlecruisery and fun and leads to all these awesome stories, but it's called the just you wait until I untap style of card. You know what I'm talking about. If not, we're about to break it down.
These are cards you pay for up front and you don't get immediate advantage. And you have to wait until like insert time here. And I'm not talking about like Rhystic Study where you just have to wait for your opponents to cast a spell because they're going to do that anyways. We're talking about things like Black Market and Phyrexian Arena, where Phyrexian Arena you pay 3 mana and you have to wait till your whole next upkeep to even draw a card. And we just think that in general that is just not how we like to play now that we're in 2024 because power creep is up and we don't have the time to wait around for these effects. Just you wait.
I want to stock map a graph of power creep with the up arrow. Power creep is up, everybody. We have to be prepared. And I think that these cards are better in small doses, but I think they can really bog your deck down when you put like 5, 6, 10, 12 of them in your deck where they kind of just cost mana and they don't do anything right away, and then they require your commander, or they require creatures in your graveyard, like a bunch of them, or they just like do something on your upkeep but not right away and not until your upkeep. Too many of these cards can definitely be a disaster. I think it's better to have a single burst effect than to just wait for this kind of thing. Something we've talked about before, like a long time ago on the channel, is like I'd rather just have a Night's Whisper most of the time versus a Phyrexian Arena. I'm up 1 card right away, and Phyrexian Arena is turn 1 nothing, turn 2 1 card, turn 3 2 cards, so it's in play for 3 turns before you get your cards back, versus Night's Whisper, it's just 2 mana, boom.
Yeah, Painful Truths is a thing, Stinging Study in black. I would just rather have these. And like, we really don't like Black Market. We've talked about that a lot on this channel. But even if you have an immediate board wipe right after, you don't get that mana until your whole next pre-combat main phase, which is going to be a whole loop around. There's a lot of time for people to destroy that, especially if it gets scary.
Yeah, so like even in the best case scenario with something like Black Market, you get the Wombo combo. You go Black Market, Toxic Deluge or something, and now it's got 10, 12 counters on it. It's the biggest lightning rod for 3 entire turns. Even if they only have sorcery speed removal, they all have a chance to answer it, and I just like, that's just not where I want to be, personally. I know it's fun, but I think it's not like we're saying don't ever play these cards, but I think I would take a serious effort to limit the number of them if I'm trying to make my deck, a certain power level.
I'd say they definitely bog down your deck. So if you play 1 or 2 in your 100 cards, I think your deck could stay relatively the same power level. But if you're putting 3 or above, that does slow down your timing in relation to everybody else's.
Yeah, you know what? We've sat down for games, because I'm thinking about this now. We've sat down for games where the pot seemed even and everybody was like, yeah, we're in agreement. These decks all seem about the same. But somebody had a lot of like just wait, I untapped effects, and they fell really far behind in the game. There was a lot of removal. Then we were all catching up, and they were just like too slow to get off the ground whenever anything went wrong for them. And I think this is probably why I'm like realizing now this has slowed a lot of people down when we play at conventions and stuff.
It's pretty crazy too, because you'll see someone be like, okay, Phyrexian Arena, my next turn they'll get 1 card off of it and they'll play some other type of just you wait till I untap enchantment or artifact or whatever. A Druid of Purification comes down and then their stuff is sniped. They got 1 card off of 7 mana roughly. Like, that is such a bad rate overall, and they don't have the time to untap because it's gone.
Look, the rate of Druid of Purification is up. We got to be prepared. We got to cut Black Market from all of our decks. I like this next category because this is target opponent. Big spells, like big giant effects, but they only target 1 opponent. So we're obviously in a multiplayer environment. So if you're spending a lot of mana and resources to only impact or interact with 1 person, that could be a problem when the other people start doing stuff.
This doesn't apply to all cards that say target opponent because there's a few really great ones. Blood Artist is an example. You can get multiple triggers very fast and it only comes down for 2 mana and it also has creature synergies. So I'd say that cheap effects that you can get multiple triggers incredibly fast are pretty good for this. But we're talking about like Cruel Ultimatum or Rakdos' Return or Overwhelming Forces. You're spending like 4 to 8 mana on target opponent does this. It's like, what about the other 2 people, right?
Yeah, they're all very good in 1v1 environments, but I think a good example, like under Overwhelming Forces, you wipe somebody's board and they're done and you draw a bunch of cards. But like a lot of cases for these cards, there's just a better card you can play. Like you can just play Decree of the black one. Annihilation? No, that's the red one. The Decree of Pain. You can just play Decree of Pain, destroy all creatures. It does hit yours, but then you draw like a billion cards still, and you've at least affected the whole table. And I'm sure there's like Ingarrick's Wake or something if you want to hit all their stuff. But just like, it just doesn't fit with Commander, really. And I think spending a lot of mana for like overwhelming forces can put you far behind, even though it looks like it's actually pretty sweet. And then Rakdos' Return, yeah, you're taking somebody maybe out of the game. But what about everybody else? And what about the fact that, you tapped all your mana and Rakdos' Return doesn't fill your hand up. It just says, screw you. And you're really hurting this one person, but there's two other people.
I mean, I think they have really good nostalgia value, but it's not even a mana thing in my opinion. It's just like you're wasting a card slot on something that only hurts one person. And yeah, like even if it hurt everyone a little bit, I'd say the card slot might be a little bit more worth it. But a big laser beam to one person for 7 mana and a whole card slot, that is like the worst thing to me.
Yeah, and the reason I think Blood Artist is so different, Blood Artist can only hurt one opponent, but just the frequency with which you get Blood Artist and the mana investment to, number of triggers you get from it is like so much different than a Cruel Ultimatum. It's a one-time deal. You get a huge burst for a ton of mana, but it's going to cost you, and I think the other opponents are going to take advantage of that lost tempo that you've created for yourself.
Yeah, Cruel Ultimatum, you need to take an entire turn for the most part to do that. Blood Artist, you could put on any turn basically and still get accrued value.
And one way to combat the fact that all these big spells are in your deck would be to just use Moxfield.com, because when you use Moxfield to build your deck, you can sort by mana value and see, oh, I have 7 7-drops in my deck. I might want to eliminate some of those.
I really like Moxfield because it gives you the average CMC, both average and median at the bottom. So you can actually see where your deck is falling and see if, maybe my interaction is a little bit like too expensive and it's just dragging all of my deck to a higher mana value. So maybe I should just put it a little bit down. I love Moxfield for this, and it just is a great place online to build your deck.
Absolutely. Our next category for lowering your own power level, maybe inadvertently, is expensive counterspells or combat tricks or cards that I only kind of refer to as gotcha cards. Wow, you're ready with those quotes. That was not rehearsed.
You're always ready. You always call it, you're like, I hate gotcha cards. Don't talk about deflecting palm to Beezy.
So some examples of this that we're talking about, Ink Shield is a very big one. It's a high variance, high value, high mana cost card to hold up. And when it works, it's great, but it doesn't work all the time. I would say it works some of the time, maybe. Access Denied is another one. It's just a lot of mana. You got to hope something kind of goes kind of right where someone casts an expensive enough spell to justify you playing a 5-mana counter and getting some Thopters out of it.
Galadriel Ambush is also one. It's Arachnogenesis, but for elves. It's a combat trick, though, or like a gotcha type deal. It basically, I have played with Inkshield and the Ambush in my decks, and it's incredibly telegraphed. Everyone always knows what I'm doing. If I have 5 cards or 5 mana, and I have a couple cards in my hand and I go pass, and someone has a big board and I don't look that worried. BZ I know has had me like with no board basically, and has just hit me for like 8, 10 here and there, because I'm not going to use it unless it's a big swing. But do you justify using your Ink Shield when someone's swinging at you for 6 because they know what you have because you held up 5 mana? It's incredibly telegraphed.
It's also kind of a disaster, I think, when you hold up 5 mana for a spell and can't cast anything else. I think with these cards, it's a lot like the Just You Wait Till I Untap style cards, where I think 1 or 2 is cool, and it can be huge blowouts, and it also masks it a little bit, because if you have 10 in your deck, everyone knows what you're up to. You're up to shenanigans, Don't play Selfless Squire and Galadriel Ambush and Ink Shield and all this stuff. So I would say limit to 1 to 2. If you get more, it really just bogs you down, and it leads to more disaster plays where something just doesn't line up for you.
They're fun, but you can't have too many. You should, in general, keep your interaction to like 3 CMC or under. That's like counter spells and stuff. And this could be different if you have a lot of flash in your deck, for instance, if your commander lets you cast things at flash speed, or if you have a lot of cost reduction, because then you might be able to hold this up and then also have other things held up that you could flash in at instant speed and just get like a creature, for instance, if you're holding up this mana. But for the most part, a lot of decks don't do well with more than one of these like big mana gotchas.
Yeah, so I would say just swap the other ones out for just like actual removal or things that affect the board in some way, either positive for you or negative for them. But that does bring us to cards that will raise your deck's power level, whether you know it or not. I've shown up to pods where I was actually rocking, 2 points out of the power scale higher than everybody else, but I didn't know, and it was because of a lot of these cards. So the first one we're going to get to is multimodal cards. These are cards that are able to do multiple things with the same card. It makes your deck more flexible. It just allows you to have more answers to like obstacles you're going to face over the course of the game.
I'm really excited for these because it seems like Wizards has been printing a lot more of those. For instance, Archdruid's Charm came out. You're going to find a land or a creature or exile an artifact or enchantment or put a 1/1 on it and fight. So it's like for 3 mana, mana at instant speed. That is so multimodal. I can see why the price was spiking. I can see why everyone's excited. And the more of these types of cards that you play in your deck, the more you'll just have an answer to whatever comes thrown at you.
Yeah, Archer's Charm literally does 5 things, and it's a 3-mana instant. Like that's such a perfect example of, I don't want to say power creep, but like complexity creep and like what a card can do, increasing. We also have like Lauren of the Third Path. It's got an immediate effect, and that's great, and it gets something off the board. But then if you need it later in the game, it can also serve as like political or like emergency card draw, and it's just nice to have that on just a dork that I would have played 2 and a white, 2/1 ETB destroy an artifact or enchantment.
It's just nice to have that value that it accrues over time, especially since people won't really be using targeted removal at it. Or one of my favorites is Shieldred's Edict. It can either sack a token creature, a non-token creature, or a planeswalker.
For each opponent, yeah.
Yeah, and that's just an amazing rate for 2 mana.
Yes, if you play, there's cards that are like each opponent sacrifices a creature, but this just gives you that little bit of extra decision to make. And I think a lot of the cards that fall into this multimodal category are sort of recent because we're getting a lot of options lately. They're just sort of iterating on designs, and power creep is a thing. Power creep's happening. Show the graph.
Stonks.
It's an emergency. The sky is falling.
But even if you are on a budget, there's like the charms back, like the Esper charms and the Teamer charms and whatever. All of those are also examples of multimodal. Rakdos charm is like a really good one. I'd say
that's what I've liked.
Yeah, so I'd say that no matter what budget you're on, there are multimodal spells that you can really incorporate into your decks that you can do a little bit more with.
Yeah, but when you compare, let's say you've got Archdruid's Charm, Lauren, Shieldred's Edict, and you compare that to somebody who's running, a Fleshbag Marauder and a Rex Sage and Return to Nature. You're just like blowing them out of the water just in terms of the flexibility of your cards.
I'm just thinking of like, compare the people playing Archdruid's Charm to like Crows and Grip. Another way to power up your deck is with free spells or alternate cost spells. Being able to trick your opponents is the type of gotcha that we really like.
Ooh, yeah.
It's like making plays when they think you don't have an answer just because you have no mana untapped or you just have a little bit of mana untapped. These spells really come in handy, so you can just be like, oh, actually, I had an answer. You just got tricked.
Yeah, you spent all this resources. You thought the game was going a certain way, but I have this, I have XYZ, and it's going a different way. A lot of the examples, I'm sure you're thinking of Force of Will and that kind of thing, but there's also other ones. You can go Misdirection. You can go Convoke spells, like fire off a Court of Calling to get your best creature with no lands untapped because your creatures can do it. Or a Pylon, and Lethal Scheme is another one I like. It's like, surprise, I'm going to put 4 cards in my graveyard, I'm going to draw a bunch, and I'm going to kill your best thing, and now my creatures are bigger.
Clever Concealment's also been a great Convoke spell.
Huge blowout, out of nowhere.
Yeah, Curtain's Call for reduction because it says 6 mana, but that's definitely not 6 mana because you have 3 opponents.
We're also going to flip the script on our only targeting one opponent thing by talking about each opponent. Cards that do something negative for each opponent, or do something positive for us for each opponent we have. So it just kind of like triples up. It swings the board in your favor, and then it costs less a lot of the time than some of these big spells that do things to only one person. I think just because of how many have been coming out lately. We have like Druid of Purification. The stocks are up, by the way, on Druid of Purification. Unexplained Absence is probably one of your favorites.
And the year, definitely.
Even if we talk about draining, we've got like Gutter Snipe and Mirkwood Bats that are just going to hit everybody. So you don't have to worry about like, all right, 2 here, and then 2 here again. All right, I got to hit you down, 2, 2, 2. It's like just all at once blanket.
They're coming out with so many. There's like the Zula ports, and then there's the enchantment that does the exact same thing as Gutter Snipe. There's just so many ways to hit all of your opponents because Commander is the fastest growing format in Magic. Mm-hmm. There's also Soul Shatter that BZ loves.
It's so good.
So just like in general, you only need to spend 1 card for multiple opponent to have an effect, and that's just like less cards in your deck that you need to like dedicate to that, and also less mana overall.
Yeah, we don't really want to talk about Modern Horizons 3 leaks yet, but when that set drops, I'm going to be so annoying about Soul Shatter and a Soul Shatter-esque effect that may or may not be in that set. There's also passive card draw as the next category. More cards in your hand generally just equates to you having more answers and more threats and just seeing more information. This can help you get your win con faster. Not having to pay for each individual card you draw helps you accrue advantage faster and over the course of the game more.
We know that if you can comb through your deck fast enough, you will just have all the cards that you need. That's why cards like Rhystic Study are so powerful. But there are other cards that you can play that are not like this expensive or this like very well known and established and just removal magnets. There's Fairy Mastermind, for instance. That was a pretty new one. And people are going to be drawing cards at your table. Why not just get a little bit of advantage off it?
Yeah, the thing about these is that they're free. Like, they don't cost mana to continuously get advantage out of. You just kind of set them down and then play your deck, or the opponents play the game, and now you get advantage out of it. Enchantress's Presence is the same way for enchantment decks. You stick like 2 or 3 of these, and then you just go off.
And if you have creatures that are dying anyways, why not Liliana, Dreadhorde General? That is
why not? I love that card.
That is one of the only planeswalkers that I find to be very good in Commander. And just sacrificing your own creatures, you're going to be doing anyways. Why not get cards off of it? And you're going to be getting a lot of cards.
That's definitely a way to power up your deck. If you talk about somebody who's playing only these, whenever you do this, pay this. I think comparing like Mentor of the Meek to something that's newer, like, I don't know, like Welcoming Vampire. I think it's favorable for the Welcoming Vampire player, and if you have a lot of interactions that are just tiny little upgrades like that, it could lead to your deck kind of rolling over people, and you might not even know why, because it's not super obvious at first glance.
I mean, I still think Mentor of the Meek is even somewhat playable. I'm thinking of cards that I think are not even playable, like Mind's Eye. I think,
Mind's Eye, there we go.
Like, that is just such a mana investment, and then you have to pay every single time. Mentor of the Meek, I think, is like definitely worse than Welcoming, but I still think it's like somewhat playable compared to Mind's Eye, where you already have to spit out 6 mana just to get a card, right?
All right, this next batch of cards, the cards that we didn't really have a great title for them, but they weaponize your board for cheap or free. This is just if your deck's doing its thing and you get to tap resources that are not mana to generate advantage, you're going to shut the door on the game. And I think it leads to, it almost feels like you're spending extra mana without spending mana, and it's just a huge leg up.
This is like one of the things that I've been adding into people's deck audits a lot lately. There's been a lot of artifact decks, for instance, that just don't really have ways to get through with damage if the board is clogged. One of these ways that I love to add is Ghirapur Aether Grid. It can turn clues, treasures, and whatever untapped artifacts into damage. And that is an amazing way to just end the game quicker. You've also really liked Sunshot Militia in your deck?
I have, yeah. It's been a solid little workhorse in my budget decks, and I like it as a cheap little damage dealer. Like if the board gets stalled, if you're tight on mana, if you're mana hungry and you just can't play all your spells at once, this is like, you kind of get to play all your spells, and now you get a whole second half of your turn where you just turn all the rest of your resources sideways to do other things that impact the game.
I mean, there's so many ways to utilize your treasures, clues, and etc. Another way is like Jaheira, turning those into mana that you don't have to sacrifice for them. I think there are just a lot of little ways to just make these things that you're already doing even better.
Yeah, you also see like a zombie of scrolls with wizards. I guess that also kind of falls into like the passive advantage side, but it's both. Turning all your wizards into card draw is like, whenever I end my turn, I'm actually also casting a spell that says draw X, where X is my wizard count.
Whirler Rogue is also amazing because you have artifacts that you might not be using this turn anyways. Why not tap them, make a creature unblockable, swing in for a lot of damage. This is really great in Voltron decks where you just happen to be making like a few treasures or something, like a Smothering Tithe in your Voltron deck because you want mana anyways. Why not use those to also make your big thing unblockable?
Yeah, Whirler Rogue has been so good. It's such a good card, when you're playing in like the middle to higher powers, like not CDH, like a little bit below that. It's just so great. And also, a lot of times when you're in artifact decks, there's constructs running around, and they get
big.
huge. And the more big they get, the easier it is to make them unblockable with Whirler Rogue.
Another way to power up your deck is, of course, tutors. Finding your best cards is so powerful, and this reduces the variance so you can enact your game plan faster. And this isn't always unconditional tutors like Demonic Tutor or Vampiric Tutor, for instance. This can be your Fierce Empaths to go find your biggest big creature, too.
Yeah, well, the more consistent your deck is, the more you can enact your game plan, the faster you can do it every single time, the more your games you're going to win, the more consistent you're going to be, and the less time you'll have to spend developing and like getting your legs out under you and just kind of like somewhat kind of fumbling around, with early game card draw. If you just have tutors for everything you need, your deck is going to demolish people who don't have access to that kind of thing.
The only problem is that how much mana are you willing to spend on it? We'd say nothing really over 3 mana. Demonic and Diabolic are very different with 2 extra mana stapled on.
Yeah, I think just because something says tutor, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to fall into this category of cards that like really increase the power level of your deck. If you've got Demonic and Vampiric and Grim Tutor in your deck, and versus somebody who's got like Razaketh's Second Right and Diabolic Tutor and Increasing Ambition, I really don't think you're on the same level. I think you really have to pay attention to what the mana value of these tutors is.
They'll be dead before they can even tutor once if they're playing against the person with 1 and 2 mana tutors.
I'm actually just impressed that I pulled Increasing Ambition
Me too.
from the memory banks. And you may have heard of this one in terms of making decks better. Fast mana. Now, fast mana actually means mana rocks generate more mana than they cost. Usually these cost 0 or 1, and they're just a big either one-time burst of mana like Jewel Lotus or Lotus Petal, or they're just some broken card that isn't banned like Mana Crypt, Mox Diamond, or Soul Ring. Yes, Soul Ring is fast mana.
It really is. It just powers you up. You know, this is why I really hate the free mulligan rule, because everyone always mulls to Soul Ring because it's that powerful. Even if you don't recognize it as fast mana, it is. And if you have free mulligans forever, people are going to mull to it for that reason, because it puts you that many turns ahead.
Yeah, I think actually, you know what? Infinite free mulligans might also increase the power of your deck, because if there's a few outliers of power, like Soul Ring's a classic card that is always the best card in someone's deck, not even close. Number one, how could it be that close? But number two, it's like, oh, it's my upgraded precon. It's got a Soul Ring in it. So when you allow for like infinite mulligans, and there's no rule to say like, oh, infinite mulligans, but put fast mana on the bottom or something when you do that. I think Command Zone does something like that. This is just going to end up with, oh, Soul Ring's in my opening hand more, because most opening hands with a Soul Ring in it are keepable. So I think even just having Soul Ring in your deck might bump your deck up, like 0.5 of a power level just from that alone.
It just puts you that many turns ahead. And yeah, as we were talking about infinite mulligans, I actually have a story about that. We used to allow infinite mulligans in my old play group when I first started playing Commander, and I ran Kalia, and I ran 33 lands with 10 8-drops, and I thought that was okay because I wasn't punished for it.
You always kept 7.
Yeah. And so in the end, it makes you a worse deck builder, and it makes your decks worse when people actually hold you to the standards of Commander as most people play.
Yeah, I have no issue with infinite mulligans, but if you talk about what power level you're at, I definitely think that if you do infinite mulligans, everyone's deck's going to play a little bit better than it actually turns up. But yeah, obviously doing things ahead of schedule, casting 3 drops on turn 1 with Mana Crypt, casting 5 drops on turn 2 or 3 with Soul Ring or whatever, that's very, very strong. So that's probably one you knew, but I think it was still worth mentioning. If you're looking for other cards that'll make your deck stronger when you go to game night this month, there's actually a most worth buying video that we did that'll give you the exact tips of which cards to buy this month.